So thanks everyone. Yeah, hopefully you're here to hear about about Ask Izzy and the Infoxchange service directory. You may know a bit about what one or both of those things are, but you're about to get an update on them both. So as always, we'd like to start by acknowledging the land on which we and the people of the land on which we joined from today. Many of you from different parts across Australia. Infoxchange, or where I sit in Infoxchange, normally is on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. So I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing and sovereign connection to the land. Some of you may have noticed, or may have already spoke to me in the last week or so, that I'm rugged up as though I am somewhere mountainous and cold. I'm actually joining you today from Aotearoa, New Zealand, from the lands of the Taranaki or Te Atiawa people on the west coast, that little red dot there on the west coast of the North Island, which is where my parents live. So yeah, I'd also just like to extend an acknowledgement that New Zealand, although we do have a treaty with First Nations peoples that you don't in Australia, we also have a pretty torrid history of dishonouring that treaty and dispossession and things like that. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge continuing connection of those people to these lands as well. So what is going on? I'm also just looking at the transcript there and seeing how well it did with things like Taranaki and Te Atiawa, but not so good. So today we are going to take a really high level look at a lot of the stuff that these sort of teams within Infoxchange have been working on. You'll see how they're all connected. We're going to zoom in on a couple of little points of them and try and drive a bit more detail out. We're not going to get really deep because we've got a lot to cover, and we're going to show a little bit of a taste of what we're working on next. Couple of notes. First up, an apology. You're hearing from me again. Our intent was that you wouldn't hear from me again and that we would sort of rotate this around the team. As you'll see, the team have been incredibly busy, so it kind of has made most sense for me to sort of step up to this. And again, apologies that we had the schedule for last Monday. I was on a plane last Monday coming back here, so we're doing it today, and thank you all for joining. It's been a little while since we've done one of these. This is our first sort of big, large scale showcase this year, and it's August already, which is terrifying. There's various reasons for that, but there's a lot to cover essentially. So we will be going through quite a lot of stuff quite quickly. Great to see some of our partners and funders and other just friends of Ask Izzy and Infoxchange here. So we do have external folks, we have internal AX folks here. Because of that, we're going to be sticking at a very non-technical level and a fairly general level. I'm going to give some analogies that are going to probably make the more technically minded people in the room want to throw up, but we'll just see how we can get through telling a good cohesive story. But we really encourage follow-ups. So if you're here for like the minutiae, you're not going to get it, but hopefully you'll have the hooks that you need to get into to find out about that kind of stuff. And a little bit on accessibility. One of the things we're going to talk about a lot today, of course, is some work we're doing supported by Department of Social Services. And, I think we've been on a really interesting journey over the last couple of months about learning a lot more about the real details of delivering accessible workshops and presentations and stuff, even beyond actually making our products more accessible. So we are trying some things like the closed captions and the transcripts. But really, I'd just love to hear back from anybody who does have any accessibility requirements at the end of this and how well we are doing at meeting and not meeting that, because it can be a tricky space around presentations and those sorts of things. So we are definitely on a learning journey there. So just to start you all off with a bit of a landscape, and this wonderfully technical diagram that hopefully you can see on your screens here kind of gives a bit of a conceptual bird's eye view of the sort of land that some of the people that you'll see on this call kind of play in. I'm not going to go through this sort of box by box because you don't need to understand every part of it. But I think the key things to really call out is that, we have these four important groups of people that we sort of work with in our directory space. So we have ultimately people who need to find services. They might be help seekers, they might be service providers themselves, but there are people who are searching for stuff. We have a bunch of apps that help provide that stuff. We have the people who provide services, and the most important thing of all this work we do is connecting those people who provide services to the people who are looking for services. We couldn't do any of that without our team of people here at Infoxchange who manage and update and collect and gather all of that data, and there's some really important stuff going on in that space. And then somewhere out to the side, we have these people who want to know what's happening in our sector. So that might be our funders, it might be our service providers funders, it might be just all the people that can benefit from the data that we can provide through these services. Today in particular, we're going to be looking at some of the purple stuff and some of the blue stuff. So we're going to start with the purple stuff, which really is around Ask Izzy, how people find information in Ask Izzy and how they make that vital connection to the service providers. And the blue stuff is more about what goes on in the background. How is all of that stuff facilitated not only for Ask Izzy, but for all of our other search products? Trying to keep acronyms to an absolute minimum in this whole thing, and please call me out on that. The one you will see on the screen, CCM, is client and case management. So one of Infoxchange's key products is our client and case management system, and our search data is an important part of that as well. For people who've been to previous ones of these, you might have seen this diagram before, which we've rebranded to the spectrum of obviousness. It's just a bit of a framing for how we're going to talk about some of the stuff today. Some of the stuff we're going to be talking about is like, we know it, we've just got to do it. Doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean it's quick, but we know what it is. Other stuff, much more emergent, we're finding it out, we're figuring our way through. So we'll be using this as a bit of a sort of framework to talk about some of this stuff as well. So without further ado, what have we been doing? So these are our main objectives over the past little while, poorly defined, divided again into that purple and blue box. So purple stuff around Ask Izzy, we've been looking at really this broad kind of thing about making Ask Izzy just better. And by better, we've been looking at sort of flexibility and ease of understanding. We've been looking at some very specific accessibility improvements to Ask Izzy, but also some much broader ways of making Ask Izzy better for people with disability, their families and carers, and hence everybody else. We've been looking a lot into impact. How do we understand whether we're doing a good job? How do we measure that? How do we get the right feedback from the right people at the right time? Underneath all that, underpinning all that, we've been looking at really just modernizing our service directory technology, making this thing more robust, more scalable, and just bringing it up to date. And that's given us opportunities to really start looking at ways that we can improve the way that we really manage this huge volume of information that we are entrusted with taking care of in the directory space. Why has that gone back? So first up, making Ask Izzy easier for help seekers. So just pulling out this bit of the diagram, again, people who are searching Ask Izzy and trying to connect to community and social services. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but again, if any of that tweaks your interest and you want to know about it, I am just going to call out the kind of the bold ones, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. Starting from the kind of fuzzy stuff and then getting down to the sort of more simple stuff. And as I go through these, I'll see whether that's true or whether I did it the other way around in the end. Let's see. No, we did it the other way around. So some obvious stuff out first. This is a bunch of work we've done around our sort of notification and warning system. So some of you who are older might remember a little time called February 2020, when we were all worried about these bushfires, and rightly so, because they were ravaging away across the nation. And as a product manager for Ask Izzy, I was very resistant to slapping a giant banner on the top of Ask Izzy that said, hey, there's some bushfires, but it was the right thing to do, and we did it. About a month later, we changed that giant banner for bushfires to COVID-19. A little earlier this year, we talked about changing that banner to the floods in New South Wales. The upshot was we really needed this more flexible way of having more up-to-date, more sort of timely information around stuff. A lot of the information in our directory is quite, it's not fixed, you know, it's subject to change, but it's not in the moment. Whereas we know with things like things opening and closing due to a disaster, the long disaster of COVID, all of these things need us to have this little sort of responsive tool set that we can use to kind of notify people of what's going on. And so we've got this lovely little banner system in there now. The most important part about it is it's user configurable. We don't need our devs to get involved whenever we want to do this. I don't have to nag them and say, hey, can we change the banner from bushfires to floods to COVID to plague of locusts or whatever's coming next. We can put things up and take them down as they need. And we've got a great little flexible toolkit around communicating those. So it's a little thing, but it's a really nice little value uplift for Ask Izzy. The next thing is a lot bigger. Again, it manifests quite small, but a lot of great work done by the team on sort of figuring this out. And a lot of this harkens back actually to some of the original design concepts for Ask Izzy that weren't able to be done in the time and the scale and budget they had at that time 5 years ago. But one of the things, and this is really just the very beginning of our journey on this theme about people using Ask Izzy, is it's fantastic for certain people in certain circumstances. It shows these great services and great information, but unless you're an experienced user, it can be easy to get lost and a bit tricky to know why you're seeing those particular results on that particular screen at a particular time. So if you've used Ask Izzy recently, you might have noticed we've added this thing that actually just picks up a little breadcrumb trail as you go through the process, and displays that back to you. So this person has got to that page because they've chosen Victoria, they've indicated they're safe tonight, they are looking for housing services for men aged 40 to 54, and they've selected that they have mental emotional issues and they're on parole. That's why they're seeing the results that are there in front of them, and they're able to go back and edit those results sort of on the fly. It's a first step towards a much bigger piece around really empowering users to be able to alter and flex and filter and sort the kind of results that they're given. But that starts with them just knowing why do they get those results in the first place. And really the bigger piece of work, the bigger, fuzzier, messier piece of work that we're really deep in right now is really trying to look at this idea of catering to our diverse user base. So as many of you know, Ask Izzy started from this place, much like Infoxchange itself did, of trying to provide support to people either at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So it was designed with that community in mind, co-designed with that community, and still does a really good job of helping people in that situation to try and find the support they need. Over time, what we've of course realized is that people who are experiencing at risk of homelessness need many of the other services and supports that all of us need. So their needs aren't restricted to housing or food or clothing. They have this diverse range of needs. And B, that many people obviously can be helped by the services that Ask Izzy provides and that our broader service directory provides. We have all this great stuff in there that could be helping a lot of people, and Ask Izzy allowed us to get it into their hands. The tricky thing is, with the number of services we have, which is somewhere upwards of 390,000 now, there are a lot of really amazing but very specific services, and it's very difficult to basically make a good path from a broad front door into a very specific service. And if you look at the examples I've put up on the screen there, we've got a YWCA registered exercise education program delivered by women for women who've experienced breast cancer. We've got the Autism Spectrum Employment Services. We've got the Australian Ventilator Users Network, and we've got an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mediation training scholarships program. All wonderful services for the right person at the right time, could be a huge help. But if you look at how we structure our home screen of Ask Izzy, it's really difficult to think about how you might be able to get there. One option would be keep adding more categories. Another option would be keep adding more questions in the flow. But we've really come to realize that we've really hit the limit on both of those things. There's only so many buttons you can put on the homepage. There's only so many questions you want to put in front of somebody. So how do we go about structuring Ask Izzy and structuring the way people search and find information such that people with those sort of really specific needs can start from this really broad place and really quickly and really easily get to the specific thing they want? We don't know the answer yet, but we have been doing a lot of work in this space, and this is real sort of just design marginalia that I'm going to throw in front of you that shows the work. But we're doing a lot of thinking about the different modes of search. So somebody who knows what they want versus somebody who's just like, oh, I've got a problem that I'm not really sure. Somebody who's using Ask Izzy for the first time versus somebody who may have come back time and time again and is trying to get back to where they want. Somebody who's in immediate crisis and needs something right now versus somebody who's maybe just a bit worried and is trying to think about their situation and understand it better. And this has really been the culmination of all the thinking we've done, looking at Ask Izzy for young people, really going back as far as probably the Help at Hand project around family domestic violence, now looking at how we make Ask Izzy better for people with disability, their families and carers. All of these different use cases that really share this common thing that you have to take 400,000 services and narrow it down to the 4 or 5 that are going to be most useful and most relevant to me. That's tricky. You're going to see a lot more on that in the coming months. So what's next in this space? Yeah, really sticking with that problem. It's still in the fuzzy zone, but we're going to start thrashing out some prototypes really quickly, putting them in front of people like our product advisory group and our broader community and getting feedback and really building up through those. We're still looking at this idea around different support services that we can include in Ask Izzy. So during COVID, we included a bunch of resources and other sort of sources of information that are not necessarily services as we've traditionally thought of them. We've seen that they're really valuable, but we really need to think about where and how we can put those in front of people. And all that stuff around filtering and sorting, which we know is things that people expect from search these days. They're difficult to do in our current paradigm. how can we sort of change things up to give people that sort of empowerment around the results they're looking at. Accessibility, the next thing. So, this really starts to get beyond just Ask Izzy itself and into the core of our data and our directory and how that all hangs together. Fewer things here that we'll go through, but really at the top level, we are looking at working with people with disability, their families and carers, and understanding, not just what does accessibility look like for them, but what do they need out of a service directory? What do they need out of a, what kinds of things are they looking for in their lives, and how do they sort of understand those things? We've taken on some functionality with the Department of Social Services to help them with their disability advocacy finder. So that's a very specific need around very specific disability advocacy services and getting people access to those. And then, of course, there's the real baseline stuff around just like, let's make Ask Izzy a better app for people that use assistive technologies or that, aren't able to use a mouse and keyboard and a screen like many of us do. So, yeah, this has been a great piece of work that I have not been hugely involved in, which is, again, why I always feel bad talking about these things. Big credit to my team. Working with the Centre for Inclusive Design and through a series of workshops with a bunch of people with lived experience in this space, and really just exploring like what are the kind of current problems with Ask Izzy, what does it do well, what does it not do, and what are some potential avenues we can pursue for making that better. Right now we're in the process of just sort of moving that into the second phase. So we've really looked at like, okay, here's the possibility space. What we'll be getting into next is starting to sort of sort through those and actually start looking at putting some of them into action, which is exciting. The Disability Advocacy Finder itself, this is currently linked from the Disability Gateway site, which I should have put the URL on there. You can check it out. It's a bit of a, very much an interim sort of fix at the moment where we're just trying to provide a pathway for people looking for these services to sort of get specifically to them, to that problem I talked about before of many, many services, very focused needs. This is sort of a bit of a roundabout way of just focusing on that need, but it's something we're solving for in the longer term. And an Ask Izzy that's more accessible for everyone. And I had a few different images for this slide, and I ended up landing on this one. It's a spot the difference between the left and the right. Those are identical screenshots. An enormous amount of work. Oh, thanks, Niles, for chucking that in there. That's actually not the right link, though. The new Disability Gateway is the one we want to be pointing people towards. Enormous amount of work has been done in the background by the Ask Izzy team to get beyond, there's a lot of, those of you who have worked in the accessibility space will understand there's a lot of easy plugins you can put on your website. You can hit the button, it scrolls through your page, it says, oh, how's your contrast, how's your HTML labeling, how's your heading, hierarchy, all that kind of stuff. That's all good. We need to do that. That's really important. But beyond that, particularly when you're looking at the way that an app is experienced via a screen reader or via, a keyboard-only navigation, you really need to actually do it to figure out if it works. You need to work through it. You need to actually try and use the app without you looking at your screen, for example, or without using your mouse. And that's when you sort of learn a lot of things around where something can be structurally sound as far as a WCAG testing tool can go, but it's completely unusable by a human. So the difference between those left and right screens is that if you are someone using Ask Izzy with a screen reader, as of when those changes have gone live, which I'm thinking was this week, but may not be quite yet. Yeah, Mitch has given me the thumbs up. It's a completely different experience. It's almost like we've built a completely different Ask Izzy from the perspective of people using those technologies, a much, much better one. It should be much more understandable, much more comprehensible, and hopefully, much easier for those people to get to the services they need. So again, a huge piece of work, but invisible to those of us that don't rely on those sort of technologies. What's next in this space? Yeah, so obviously the disability advocacy stuff, we're really working on making that a better integrated, more seamless part of our service. But really continuing to work with those people with disability, their families and carers, and how they want to be using this thing. And we've just convened a wonderful group of people, our disability reference group, who have a range of people across both lived experience of having a disability, working in that sector, caring for people with a disability, etc. And they're going to be a huge asset to us, along with our regular product advisory group, in helping us design these better solutions. So number 3 in this space, understanding our impact. This is something we've been talking about at a lot of these showcases, and I'm really happy to say we've made some awesome progress here as well. This is just to really recap the last 4 or 5 showcases, my complaints about this. We know a lot of people use Ask Izzy. We know we have in the tens of thousands of users a week. We don't know who they are necessarily. We don't know whether they're succeeding in what they're trying to do necessarily. We don't know what the outcomes of their searches were. So although a lot of people is a number we can count, is that a good number? Is that a bad number? We don't know. We need to get beyond that. So that really breaks down to these sorts of things. Down the bottom, there's just some really good housekeeping that's been done by Callum and others around making our analytics just more human comprehensible, and building out some great dashboards that Mitch has helped us with to sort of understand that information. Right at the top fuzzy end is still that kind of the really thorny problem of getting the right feedback from a person at the right time. We know that success for somebody using Ask Izzy might be, it might happen on the day they use Ask Izzy, it might happen the next week, it might happen a year later, that they really realize that the point where their life turned around was when they were able to find and connect to this person through Ask Izzy. So we're still really working on that question about when are the points when we can sort of jump in and sort of maybe get some feedback from somebody that tells us that we're doing a good or a bad job. And there was a question there that I think we'll pick up at the end. We could share that list. So, in terms of getting the right feedback at the right time, we have built in a few little bits and bobs across different parts, particularly in our beta app. What you're seeing there is a screenshot from a thing called UserSnap. The reason I shared this is not to sort of say, hey, UserSnap is amazing, and we may not even stay with UserSnap. We'll probably end up using something that we've built internally, because then we have a lot more control over the content and data privacy and all those sorts of things. But we now really have this ability to at least kind of see the kinds of things that people are going to ask us if they have an opportunity to ask us things in Ask Izzy. We can see what we can sort of do about that. We can make sure we can respond to those people, whether it's feedback. One of the challenges we have obviously is that people in a tough spot are often going to reach out through any channel that is available to them. So we're going to have people asking us for help through this channel. It's not really an appropriate place for us to provide help. We need to be able to sort of manage to make sure that those people are being treated with sufficient care, that they're not sort of disappearing between the cracks, but also that we're pointing them in the right direction to find the help that they need. And measuring what matters. So beyond that idea of just giant numbers, and I implore you all not to sort of burn any of these digits into your brain. This is still new sort of data collection. It's going to wobble a lot until we sort of start to get the massive data that we can sort of say is meaningful. But we're starting to be able to count sort of things like what you'll see at the top there is page depth. So of all the people that get into Ask Izzy, how deep are they going? If they only get 1 page deep, we're pretty sure they got no help at all. If they're getting 150 pages deep, something very interesting is happening, and we're not really sure about that. But somewhere there's a sweet spot of, we think the average Ask Izzy search, they might see 5 or 6 pages, so we can sort of see where the activity lands. Percent of sessions that get a result is the other one I would call out there. So one of our sort of success metrics we've defined is like, it's all good for someone to touch Ask Izzy, that's great. But unless they got from the homepage to an actual service page, we probably haven't provided a lot of value to them. So we can look at this number and say, all right, about 38% of people, about 38% of sessions, there's a lot of caveats on all of this, that start on the homepage, end up getting a result. Can we make that number go up? Will it go down? What's going to happen if we make a change? What happens to that number? And some other things around, different sessions that come in from different places, and just really understanding how people are actually using Ask Izzy with a lot more nuance and detail that allows us to make better informed decisions. I'm very excited about all of this. It may look like dry numbers to others. What's next in this space? Yeah, so again, that's the wrong slide, so that's good. But really, I think it is about probably just speaking about this a bit more publicly, starting to show some of this stuff, starting to communicate it out, starting to be able to respond to questions we get from our funders and partners who say, oh, what's happening in this kind of space? We're now much better equipped to ask and kind of answer those much more nuanced questions about user behavior. So that's really sort of the Ask Izzy sort of where we're at place, and now really moving more into the sort of service directory stuff, and I'll sort of bring all this back together again at the end. But if we are really looking at the space within the dotted line, the service directory often sort of seen as just a database. It's a bunch of tables somewhere, who cares? But really there's a lot more to it than that, and a lot of it's really important. I suppose as I came into this role, very much through Ask Izzy lens, and that was my whole world. And as we've sort of zoomed out, so much of the value of Ask Izzy is completely reliant on this service directory and how it works. So it's really important, all the great work that's happening in this space. This is probably a little bit more technical. There's another acronym there, API. So we're going to sort of talk in very non-technical terms about what that means. But really, this runs the gamut of just making sure that all of the latest things are at the latest version and that they're working and they're robust, right up to sort of exploratory, what are the possibilities, what are the services that we don't even offer yet that we possibly could with this huge massive directory data that we have. So this is one of the analogies that's going to annoy tech people. I'm going to use computer hardware as an analogy for computer software to hopefully tell a meaningful sort of story about what's going on here. This is our service directory. It's wonderful. It's robust. It does a lot of great work for a lot of people. Beyond just Ask Izzy, we have many other websites and applications that rely on this service directory for thousands of searches every day. And it does them. It meets that need. But the problem with it is it's getting a little long in the tooth. It's very one piece. It's hard to switch out any bit of it. If the keyboard in this analogy breaks, it's hard to replace that keyboard. It's even hard to find people who can work on a machine like this, who understand how this kind of technology operates. It's all a bit legacy. It's time for a change. But because it's such a critical piece of infrastructure that so many people use every day, we can't just throw it in the bin and replace it with something else. And we can't just wait with fingers crossed and hope that it doesn't fizzle out one day. So what we're aiming for is something a little more like this. It's despite the garish LEDs, the point being it's modular, it's accessible, we can get into it and we can pull bits out and we can swap them out for other things. It's understood by people, generally more modernly how it works. It's much less of a sort of monolith, and we can change one part without having to consider the whole necessarily. So in the meantime, we've sort of landed somewhere like this. So we still have our beige box, our lovely beige box, doing all the work. And if you're a user of our services, that's still what you're using ultimately, and you won't notice any difference. But we now have this thing standing up next to it. It's black and white still. I haven't activated the LEDs yet. But right now, this thing is basically doing everything that beige box is doing, or is capable of. It's not yet doing it, and it's really ready to start sort of moving beyond that. A lot of work has gone into this little thing in between that makes sure those two things can sort of stay in sync and match up, and that we can make this, from a user's point of view, absolutely seamless transition from the old beige box to the new hotness. When we've made that transition to the new hotness, well, then we really start to get this opportunity to do more and more and more, right? It's not just about replacing what we had. It's about having this scalable, modular kind of architecture that we can do stuff with. And really just stretching this analogy to breaking point, there's a bunch of stuff that's going to allow us to get data in and out more easily. We can do that at scale. When we talk about APIs, that's essentially what we're talking about with the directory. How do we get data in? How do we get data out? How do people search? How do they report? And all of that sort of stuff. And there's huge untapped potential there. But also, we can scale performance and reliability much more easily by chonking in different parts. And just a obligatory graphics card joke in there for those that know about such things, have tried to buy a graphics card in the last 12 months. What's next in this space? So, this is really a huge area of sort of exciting opportunity. Once, we're very near to having this sort of fundamental basic, we've reproduced the thing we had to reproduce in the new thing. And that gives us a lot of capability to start building, to start exploring new features, to start thinking about new things. There is a note there that we are intending, I think, to have more sort of high detailed and regular internal showcases around this. So external folks, I'm sure you've probably already glazed over a little bit, but we really want to start sharing within the Infoxchange what's happening here, the decisions that are being made, and why. And the last sort of big section of this, and in many ways, I suppose the most important, Ask Izzy, our client case management system, OnePlace and HSNet, if you're familiar with those, all of these things that provide these really vital services, vital directory services, are completely useless if we don't have up-to-date, comprehensive, well-managed, trusted data, right? That is really, in our directory space in Infoxchange, that's our value proposition. You know, we do this really well. However, we're doing it really well in a really shifting context, and there's a couple of things that we need to really working on to make sure we can continue to do it well. So down the bottom, you know, is really just this idea that there's just volume. We just have to deal with a bigger volume than we've ever had to deal with before. Up the top, there's all these other opportunities. There's all these things we'd love to be able to do that we just really can't do right now because we're focused on our sort of core proposition of get the data in. But, you know, there are opportunities on the table that we want to be able to access. In the middle is really this idea that we have this wonderful team. For those of you that don't know, I'm going to lift the curtain for a moment and spoil the magic of our service directory. We're often asked, you know, how do you keep it up to date? Is there some crazy machine learning algorithm? Are you scraping the internet? Do you have a swarm of drones? The fact is we have around 20, I'm going to get the number wrong, but we have a team. We have a team of people and their job is really extracting this data from the community sector, and that's by calling people, it's by searching, it's by a lot of, you know, time on the phones and time in our record system updating data, and it's very manual, it's very labor intensive, but that's how we get the kind of quality and accuracy of data. 25 wonderful people these days. That's how we get the quality and accuracy of data that we have. We want those people to be spending time on those things like quality and accuracy and value add, not on the sort of basics of how long does it take me to upload a record. So we're really trying to get that work done to make the easy stuff easier. So we've grown to this point. You know, the top one of these, didn't actually get around to labeling these. The top one is numbers of records in the database, number of service records, and the bottom one is our searches. And, you know, I mean, if you look at that search one in particular, like that just enormous leap, and that's as we've brought on new funders and new partners, new people have contributed to the service directory. But the thing that we built back when we had, you know, 200,000 records and maybe a couple, you know, 100,000 searches a year just is not going to cut it when we're at the scale that we're at now. We need to be able to collect and gather and validate information faster than we ever have before. But, you know, the sector's capability is growing as well. In the old days, you know, I guess one of our kind of differentiating points is that we had an online directory, and, you know, we would kind of manage the online part of that when other businesses in the sector weren't really online yet. They could see the value in it, but they didn't have the capability to be online. This graphic that I stole from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, I think just illustrates this fact that, you know, the maturity of the sector to provide and consume data electronically has grown hugely in the last, you know, couple of years. And we need to be better positioned to be able to take advantage of that. There's a lot of things we can be doing that can shortcut calling somebody on the phone and getting the information out of them. I don't think we fax stuff anymore, but you know, there's a lot on the table there that we could be taking advantage of. And, you know, really the job that the team has been doing over the last little while is just really ensuring that if we're going to make something that does all this, that we make the right thing. And again, this is a little bit of just sort of you know, design fluff to some extent, but I think the point that we're trying to make is we actually know what this is. This isn't a complicated, crazy thing. We have the requirements. We have all the institutional knowledge of like, this is what's going to make updating really fast and really smooth and amazing for everyone. What that gives us is the opportunity to actually leapfrog a bit of like, well, we don't have to wait till we've built it. Let's game out some of the scenarios. Let's play with some prototypes. Let's sit with the updaters and say, well, what if it did this versus this? And start to kind of understand, you know, some of the real pain points that often in traditional IT development don't really emerge until someone started using something, you know, for the first couple of weeks, months. And they go, oh, actually, that thing that we thought was, you know, sounded so good when it was written as a user, I need to, so that doesn't really work once it pops up on my screen. So the team's been doing some really great work and just trying to bring some of that stuff to light in a really quick, really low fidelity way that's just immensely valuable for understanding how people are going to use this thing. Again, if we do our jobs right, all of this will be completely invisible to anybody who's using our directory, but what they will see is an uptick in, you know, the rate at which we're able to update, the quality of updates we're able to do, and just the, you know, the scale of impact that we can have in building out our directory. What's next in here, really, again, at the speculative end, it is this idea that once we've got the basics nailed, that really frees us up to think about like all the additional value that we can provide and the, the ways that we're able to respond to different requests. When, some of our friends from DSS are on the call, and when they come to us and say, we've got this use case around a particular funded group of things that we want to be able to display to users in this way, and we can say, yeah, we can absolutely do that because we've got this like flexible modular system that can do that for us now. And we've automated and accelerated all of the basic sort of boring stuff down the bottom. So that is a lightning tour through all of that stuff. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I guess, what's next, and then hopefully we will have time for if anybody has any questions. So Infoxchange has just completed its strategic planning for the next 3 years. We don't have a lot in the public domain yet about this, hence me pulling up this graphic from a 1980s Australian television show, I believe. We are not changing what we do. We're not going into burgers or Bitcoins, but I think there's some really exciting stuff there and about really making some choices about things like collective impact with the rest of the sector, and yeah, a lot of just, I think, really exciting opportunities for us to just really nail what it is that we do and with renewed focus. So that might change a little bit about what these kind of showcases sound like, because we might be talking about slightly different things. You might be ideally hearing from slightly different people as we sort of look at this expanding ecosystem of things and how they all come together. Ask Izzy Plus. Some of you have heard about this. It's happening is the upshot from that. So supported by the Vodafone Foundation and working with Code for Australia, we are really getting underway with starting to build out this next sort of, evolution of Ask Izzy that we've talked about for a long time. I pulled out this diagram, which again doesn't probably make a lot of sense out of context, but really it's this notion that Ask Izzy is not going anywhere. Ask Izzy is to help seekers connect to a service provider or service providers. Ask Izzy Plus ideally sits in this space where it helps service providers connect to other service providers. And that is everything from, potentially I'm a new provider, I've moved into a new area, I don't know what's around, show me what you got. It helps us with service providers that we know are working often outside of their areas of expertise. If you're a social worker, you need to know where to find the best housing, the best food, the best clothing, but also the best mechanic and the best daycare and the best, place to get cheap groceries potentially. So we know that these people do an enormous amount of work to kind of gather and curate this information in the area they're in, and there's a huge opportunity for Ask Izzy, for an Ask Izzy-like experience that's really targeted at service providers to help them. Our focus in this work is going to be on the family and domestic violence space, because we know that is one where the problem is really acute and the information level that these people working in that sector have to store and process is enormous. And if we can solve for that sort of complexity, we're probably going to be able to do a pretty good job for some others. So within the next 6 months, you will start to see some, really tangible sort of prototypes of that kind of thing. And we're hoping to get them into the hands of some providers to use, this year and scale from there. So that's a big new piece of work for Infoxchange and one that I am very excited about. And then just at a really high level, this is just, I suppose, without any time on it, but the sense of we are really at a point where we're finishing up some capability stuff. And by finishing that capability stuff, we get to do some more exciting stuff. So, the Ask Izzy accessibility improvements, we've sort of nailed all of the obvious low-hanging, known stuff, the technical accessibility stuff. And that really frees us up to now start looking at, what does it even mean just to be the best Ask Izzy we can be for people with disability, their families and carers. And likewise in the service directory, we've got the platform nailed, and that allows us to start looking at better manual information exchange, worked the brand into that one, and better automatic info exchange. So how do we get information in and out of our systems much better, much faster? Ask Izzy Plus is in there. And then really, looking at some of these big future use cases, which again, happy to talk about if anyone has any, or happy to proffer ideas if anyone has any questions about that. But so many opportunities in the data space, in the reporting space, in the and just the sort of space of really widening the ways that our service directory is useful to people, I suppose. And that is really a wrap. That was a little over time, sorry, and hopefully it was of some interest to somebody. Some huge thanks to people. I've listed a large fraction of a certain section of Infoxchange here, but you know, the Ask Izzy, people have worked across Ask Izzy, and sorry, Frank, your name should be up there as well. You know, a huge contribution from a lot of different people across our development and design teams in getting this to where it's at. The service directory, which, as I said, there is, you know, everybody in our tech team here in Melbourne has probably touched it at some point, but some particular calls out to, you know, Thea, Robin, Bianca, Becky, Don, Matt and Frank toiling away in the background, Raska before he left us. And of course, you know, our leadership from Jess and Tan and others, our product advisory group, who we didn't talk about a lot today. Some of them may be on the call, but they remain a fantastic asset to us in terms of connecting us to the community and the sector that we are working for, and I guess keeping us honest to what we say and to what we believe in that space. A lot of folks in Infoxchange, I know Brendan has shoulder tapped people at various times to bounce ideas off and test, and we're really grateful for your input on that. Notice, Brendan, you got a haircut for the showcase. Thank you. That was that's all done. And of course, all our funders and partners that support us in doing this really important work, and that you know, I think are really patient with us while we work through some really deep, thorny background stuff. All of the service directory stuff, for example, that we know is of absolute vital value to providing the service we do, but it doesn't look like much. We can't show you what the data table looked like last week and what it looks like this week and go, wow, but without the ability and support, without the support of those people, we don't have the ability to do that stuff, and it's absolutely critical to providing the service we provide. That is it from me for today. If anybody has any questions they would like to ask, please let me know, but otherwise you can always email myself, bshaw@infoxchange.org. You can email askizzy@infoxchange.org. And we will be happy to answer any questions or go deeper on any of this. Those of you in the internal channels, Yammer, Teams, email, stick a post-it to my screen. I might be in the office one day. There's so many ways we can do this.
There was one question from Michelle earlier about the disability reference group.
Sorry, I was on mute. I just wanted to know, can we find out who's on the reference group? Or
I don't see why not. I don't have the list to hand, but it is a group that we recruited via, I suppose, the people that we dealt with the workshops. So you know, they came out of the reference group, I believe, that DSS puts together, and through Dana and things like that. So there's probably some familiar names in there. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure we could probably share a list.
Okay.
The other thing that could be helpful just to add is that the type of people in that group are folks that live with a disability, folks that care for people that live with a disability and their families. And there's also a bit of crossover because maybe you work in the disability sector, but you also live with a disability. And so we tried to get a good breadth of people with lots of different experiences, as well as dotted all over the country. So got about 15 wonderful voices who we've just met once, but are looking forward to working with for the rest of the year.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So if there is nothing else, yeah, please shoot questions through to me in your own time, but otherwise I will bid you all adieu. Ka kite anō, as we say here in New Zealand.
Thanks, Ben. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all. Kia ora.
Thanks, Ben. See ya. Bye.